Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Mission Talk, where we talk everything in missions from across the street to around the world. And now we are going to go to a mission organization that is involved in many different parts of the world, but they're also located here in the States. I have joining with me from World Mission Alliance. I have the founders, presidents, and all around travelers, Chuck and Helen Todd. Thank you, Chuck and Helen, for jumping on with me today.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity.
Jacob,
Absolutely.
We're excited to talk to you. Mission Talk is what we love to do. So I just admire the name of the podcast.
Absolutely. And you have your own podcast, which I have been listening to, and we can jump into more detail about that later in the interview. But I'm a big fan of podcasts. And so, yes, like we had already spoken about, there has never been a show like Mission Talk that highlights mission organizations, both large and small. We go with organizations that are largely spread across all the way down to a church planter, and missions of any kind is important. And so that is why we are here. And so to kick us off, I have gotten the chance to know you two on just a small scale, just within little conversations and with research. But can you just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your family?
Well, we're Chuck and Helen Todd. And as you mentioned, our organization is based in the United States. Our headquarters are actually right outside of Branson, Missouri, which probably your listeners have heard of. However, we're a very international organization. So World Missions Alliance works in 27 countries around the world. As far as us personally, so I'll introduce myself, and I guess Chuck will introduce himself. So we have been married for 27 years. And as your listeners can probably detect my accent, I'm not from Branson, Missouri originally. So I was born in Russia, or to say more specifically, former Soviet Union, which when I was growing up there, it was still Soviet Union. And so it's quite a story how we met, and we may touch on it later. If not, your listeners can always check it out on our website. We have a brief version of it there. But we have two sons. Our oldest son is 25 years old. He's based in Washington, D.C. And our youngest son is 15. He's just finishing his freshman year in high school. And so we're very, very blessed. We also have a furry son. I don't know if that counts, but he's
A dog, just to be clear.
So, Chuck, are you from Missouri originally, or where are you from?
Yes, I'm from this area, Missouri, Kansas area. I was born in Kansas, raised here in Missouri. So, yes, this is pretty much where I'm from.
So I have read a little bit of the story about how you two met, but I'm very curious to know the good details of how you two met.
So actually, our story has to do with missions, and I'll let Chuck tell his version of the story. And of course, I have my version of the story.
Well, it kind of started with just a call into the missions. I was going back before we met. I had just gotten out of the military, went through Bible college, and then the opportunity came with perestroika and Soviet Union to go and pass out Bibles and have rallies in the Soviet Union. And of course, my military training was basically training to consider the Soviet Union as a opposing force. So the idea is to come and bring that closure of that portion of my life as I was moving into full-time ministry. To me, was a beautiful opportunity. So I went to Russia, and as I got up and give my testimony at one point, and I heard God say, "This is where I'm calling you to be." And I thought everybody heard it. It was the audible thing, something of biblical proportions. I was shocked. I probably gave the worst testimony ever. I'm sure I just got up there and babbled, but I received my calling right then and there. So it took a little while to get my house in order to be able to move to the Soviet Union. During that time, the Soviet Union collapsed, and there's a lot going on. And through another circumstance, my father's ministry ended up being able to go over there and start as an evangelistic organization. And I was able to go to Russia under his umbrella originally. And so I moved there, started pastoring a church in Moscow. As we organized other teams coming in to go throughout, we settled in Moscow because that was the only place you can make international phone calls. In Soviet Union at that time, if you had to call outside the city, for most cities, you had to go and reserve a telephone booth and then give the number. They would call and connect you, and it was kind of a big procedure. Moscow, you can actually call from your home. So that was so we went to Moscow, and in that process, I was able to meet, which later became my wife, Helen, and it was so great because we became very good friends, and we worked together from morning to night for a long time. And she was not interested in me beyond just friendship, and I was not really interested in her beyond friendship. And at the same time, we was at a birthday party. And at the very same time, I looked at her one time at this party, and I seen something completely different. It hit me all at once. And I decided this is the woman that I love. And it just shocked me. I found out much later at the same party, she felt the same way. So that was kind of how we met in the beginning. But our entire, I don't know that we ever actually dated until after we got married. But our entire time was always focused around ministry. And it was, that's having the same focus, her focus and mine. I think that draws you together to a very strong bond.
Absolutely. And Helen, I'm sure everything he said was spot on to your story, correct?
There are always two sides to the story, right? But it's interesting that, as I mentioned in the very beginning, that our story has to do with missions from the very beginning. If it wasn't for missions, we wouldn't have really even met. Because when I was growing up in Russia, as a young child, it was still under communism, the final years of communism. And so the faith was not allowed. God was forbidden. God was the outlaw in the Soviet Union. And so there was really no way for me to find out anything about God if it wasn't for missionaries from the United States that smuggled gospel tracts into the Soviet Union. And so one of these gospel tracts found its way to me. It was given to my brother in the street by these missionaries. He brought it home. And through this gospel tract at the age of 14, I gave my heart to Christ. So this is where my relationship with Jesus began. And if it wasn't for this relationship with Jesus, I wouldn't have been pursuing God further, But so years later, so that was at 14. Now fast forward 5 years, and I'm a college student in Moscow, and the Soviet Union just fell apart. And I really had this, I already forgot about my gospel tract experience and inviting Jesus into my heart, because for these 5 years, nothing changed in my life. I didn't have access to a Bible. I didn't have a church to attend. I didn't have other people to find out anything about God. But suddenly, when I had that freedom and opportunity, seemingly out of nowhere, I had this overwhelming desire that I wanted to know more about God. I needed God. And so I started pursuing different opportunities. And so it happened so that I was pursuing a degree in engineering at one of the universities in Moscow. And one of my friends mentioned an organization from the United States, a missions organization that was coming to Moscow every month and bringing evangelistic teams of missionaries and sharing the gospel all across Russia. And they needed help with translation. And that's how I became involved with the ministry called Revival Fires, which was the ministry of Chuck's father. And so then a little later, Chuck moved to Moscow. And of course, he already shared the story how we met. But it all started with this gospel tract that was randomly given away in the streets of Moscow. And this is why missions for us, it's not just something we do, it's something we live. Because it even our marriage would not have happened if it wasn't for missions.
And to me, there's such an exciting part about that whole story, in that the people that risked so much during the Soviet Union to smuggle in these gospel tracts, they didn't see Helen. They never met her. She never seen them, because the gospel tract went to her brother, who was wanting to practice English. It's very possible they went home very discouraged, saying they accomplished nothing. By all the effort and all the expense they went, we don't know who they are. We don't know what they thought, but it's very possible they came back and said, what did we accomplish? Not knowing that as a result of their sacrifice, as a result of their hearing God's call and answering God's call, my wife was able to find Jesus Christ, was able to find the love of a Savior that is not found, and a love that's not found anywhere else. As a result of that, I was able to find a wife that's been all because these people heard the call of God and answered in the most bizarre way to go and smuggle gospel tracts in and pass them out in the streets. That started a chain reaction that is still going on. So it's incredible. It's an incredible story across the board of just what difference you can make just by answering God's call.
Absolutely. And on that note of answering God's call, at what point did you two feel the call into not just ministry, but even the mission of what you're doing now? At what point did you see God start to transform that in you?
The way we met each other was through doing ministry. And so doing missions work in Russia. And we thought that Russia is going to be our mission field forever. We didn't really have any aspirations or dreams of moving anywhere outside of Russia, because it's a very big country. And the freedom that we had was really unprecedented. And we felt like we can accomplish a lot. And we did in the years that we were there. But at some point, probably a couple of years into our marriage, we were actually expecting our first son, and we came to the United States just to have the baby and then fully intending to go back. At that point, the Lord spoke to us that we are to make our base here in the States, specifically in the Branson area, and that He's going to expand our ministry. But He didn't specify to us how or when or where, but we just took this word and we established our base here, but we continued going back and forth to Russia every month with a baby, which was quite an adventure in itself.
But we found one thing that we found early on in Russia with the teams, and which motivated us more. We've always had a desire to bring revival to the United States. And one thing we've noticed very quickly was that when everybody that went overseas got out of their comfort zone, left their culture, and tried to minister the gospel out in a different culture, they themselves received a revival, personal revival like none other. And they would go back home on fire. And my thought was, well, the best way to bring revival to America is to mobilize the church in America outside of its culture and get them to take part in the great harvest, in God's end time harvest. So that was our motivation. And this is thing we continued to observe month after month, each person that goes. And then I started to realize the Great Commission. I think that I only half understood it. I can't say what everybody else, how they understood it, but I've always understood the Great Commission's whole purpose was to propagate the gospel, was to set the captives free, so to say, to share Jesus Christ and that opportunity to others. And that's true. That is part of it. But the truth of the matter is, Christ can do that without us. It's a blessing for us to be involved in His work. That's where the blessing comes from. And the idea, us sharing the gospel with other people, brings us into a deeper relationship with Christ, brings us to another level of Christ that we can never experience in any other way, but by doing the work of the Father. So in God's privilege, He allows us to take part in His work by the commission. I truly believe the the Great Commission is really put there for us to share the gospel. It's an opportunity for us to run higher on that ladder into a deeper relationship with him. And another thing we've often noticed is change lives. And each person that goes, their life is forever changed because they have new experiences with the gospel that just cannot be repeated in any other way. And that's a life-changing experience. And that is going to be shared to others. They become a different person. And everybody can see the difference in their lives. Their lives will be changed and impacted also. So it's, again, another chain reaction.
Sounds like you're hitting right there on what the purpose was of starting World Mission Alliance. And am I correct? That was the foundation that was built on. Can you touch on what the complete vision and mission of World Mission Alliance is? Sounds like you were hinting a little bit of what it was, but can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
So you're very correct. That was building up, as we continue to go to Russia back and forth. And as Chuck mentioned, we observed that not only we were reaching the unreached people for Christ, but we were bringing this passion into the body of Christ here in the United States. In 1999, we were basically encouraged to start our own ministry because our missions department was growing. And so there were two things that happened. It was 1999. And one that, we were encouraged to start our own organization. And number two, in that same year, God opened the door for us to China. And that was completely miraculous. In 1999, there was no Christian activity done in China outside of the underground church. The only things that people outside of China heard about it was that there is an underground church that is being severely persecuted and is literally impossible to do anything in terms of Christianity in China openly. So you had to go deeply undercover, smuggle in the Bibles, However, this was not the kind of work that God called us to do. Everything we did in Russia and the former Soviet Union was very open, very above ground. And we felt like this is what God called us to do. But not to make that story too long, God just absolutely miraculously opened the door there by connecting Chuck with a minister of religion in a certain area of China, that when Chuck approached him with the idea of doing missions work in his area, under his jurisdiction openly, he said, absolutely. And not only he verbally affirmed that, but he signed an agreement between World Missions Alliance, newly formed World Missions Alliance, and his department in allowing us to do that, because we wanted to have a written proof to avoid having any problems. What we didn't know at the moment of that signing, that this man, whose position was to oversee all church activities and even persecute Christians if they were not aligned.
Not just church activities, all religious activities. So Zao, Buddhist, Islam, any religious activity in that area.
So 7 years prior to meeting Chuck, he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and the doctors gave him no hope. And so the pastors of the churches that he was overseeing, they came to him and they asked to pray for him, and he was healed of lung cancer, of terminal lung cancer. And so when Chuck appeared in his office with such an unusual request of openly sharing Christ in the churches in China, he later told Chuck, I knew that when you asked for that God healed me for this very reason. And so he literally was risking his position by giving us this permission. But that meeting launched us into that ministry in China, which has continued for over 20 years. And we were able to do this absolutely openly and freely, proclaim the gospel, distribute Bibles. But so this was the beginning of World Missions Alliance. But to answer your question, what is the idea behind it and the concept? So the idea of World Missions Alliance, and what I feel sets us a little bit apart from maybe other missions organizations is the purpose of World Missions Alliance is twofold. Number one is to take the gospel to the nations, to the unreached nations, and even nations that have been reached, but perhaps are not fully evangelized. Perhaps the church needs encouragement and strengthening. So this is number one. Number two is to involve the church here in the United States and Canada, really, and other countries. We're now kind of expanding into Great Commission hands-on. We believe it's important to support missions. It's important to pray for missions. It's just as important to experience missions hands-on. Nothing can replace that impact that missions have on your life, on your walk with Christ. And so in every country where we work, where God opened the door for us, we bring teams of lay people or people that are in ministry. It doesn't really matter. People who feel that stirring, the desire to fulfill the Great Commission. And you will be surprised, or maybe not surprised, Jacob, how many people, and these are your listeners and potential listeners, how many Christians in the United States have a deep desire within them to fulfill the Great Commission and don't know how to do it. We encounter this on a daily basis. During last year, COVID, all the shutdowns, all the uncertainty, borders being closed all over the world, there were over 1,000 people that joined our mailing list just through that year. These are people who want to know how to get involved in missions. And so it has been an incredible journey in these 22 years since we started World Missions Alliance, of seeing lives saved, seeing lives transformed on the mission field, but also seeing callings developed, within people as they come to the mission field. And just to show you how it's a ripple effect, which is what Chuck mentioned in the beginning, now not only there are Christians from America and Canada that come with us on the mission field, now the churches that we have been impacting in the countries where we work are sending their own missionaries to other countries, including the church in China. So 2 years ago, the church that we have been working with for over 20 years sent their first team of missionaries from China to Branson, Missouri on their first mission trip. How cool is that?
Well, and just like you had talked about, I mean, a lot of times it takes a Christian going to a different culture and bringing that revival back with them.
It's insane. Of course, that just reminds me of a funny story that I thought was very interesting. While we were there in Branson, or while they were here in Branson, there was some white guy selling some type of trinkets in one of the shopping areas that happens to speak perfect Chinese. So when they seen the Chinese delegates there, they decided they would practice their Chinese. Immediately, they launched onto him with a pretty aggressive witness. And I'm watching this and back up, it's all in Chinese. And all of a sudden I hear him running away, yelling something in Chinese, and the Chinese person chasing after them. "You need Jesus, you need Jesus." In English. And I thought that was the funniest thing I think I've ever seen. And that happened right here.
Street evangelism in Branson can get intense.
So I've seen several of your videos on your website about your missionaries. Are they all short-term missionaries, or does WMA employ missionaries, or how does the missionary side thing work?
So mostly it's short term. Our mission trip is 10 days, and the missionaries that come with us, they raise their own support or they fund themselves. This is part of the adventure, actually, and we have seen some amazing faith-building stories that happen even through that experience. And then they come with us for a 10-day trip into one of the countries where we work. In that country, we partner with local indigenous churches. So we don't necessarily work with missionaries in the countries. We try to connect with the local churches that maybe don't have any other support from outside of their country. And as long as they're aligned with us in a vision of evangelism and wanting to bring more people in their country to Christ, that's the only really requirement that we have to establish that connection. We partner with that church in various projects, the end result of which is to win people to Christ. Now, the way that project may look may be different depending on the needs of the country. For example, we work in a number of Muslim countries. Of course, we can't engage in street evangelism in a Muslim country, but there are other ways that we can meet people and bring people to Christ. Sometimes it takes form of medical missions, where we will establish a free clinic in the church, short term, just for that course of 10 days. And we invite people to come and see doctors and nurses from the United States. Sometimes it's a support of some kind of local need. In many Muslim countries, there is a refugee crisis going on. And so we will go and minister to the refugees. In other countries, perhaps it's an orphanage outreach. But the end result, no matter what we do, is to win people to Christ. So even within medical missions, it's not very intensive medical care that we provide. So we don't perform surgeries necessarily because the clinic is not set up in a medical facility. So the scope of medical work is somewhat limited, but the end result of it is incredibly powerful. So we don't do construction of any kind. Really, the most important thing that the missionaries do while they're on the mission field with us is win people to Christ. And normally it's through the power of their personal testimony, because every single one of us, if we've been saved for more than one day, we have a testimony of something that God has done in our lives. And that personal story Chuck mentioned in the beginning, changed lives, change lives. If Jesus changed your life, you have the capacity, you have the power to change someone else's life. And so that really describes what we do.
So I have seen on your website, I mean, it's a long list of countries you guys are involved with. But for those listening who might not know that yet, can you just list off some of those countries and the things that are happening, just to give us a kind of just a picture of how many areas you guys are involved with?
We're working with 27. I think it's actually 28 different countries we work with. Now, some of them, such as Syria, we've helped establish a church in Syria, working with another one, actually 2 churches in Syria. Of course, we don't go there anymore due to the current situation there, but we are still very active in Iraq. We're still somewhat active in Jordan. We work in Indonesia. We've worked in India. We've worked in we're currently working
Thailand, Nepal. Really, just to give you an overview, we're on every continent except Australia and Antarctica.
That's the only 2. We haven't found an interpreter for the penguins yet. So,
but some of the countries we're more active presently. Others, like Turkey, for instance, we've only been there once, and we have not really felt the calling of God to return there yet. So we don't have an ongoing work there. But then there are other countries like Iraq, for example, where we established a church in 2006, and we have never missed a year of going there, even through all the challenges and wars and situations. So we work in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe. We work in Asia. We work in South America. We work in Africa. So
we've even been to the Ushuaia, which is the most southern city in Europe. They call it the end of the world. So
the southernmost city in Argentina. They have a train station there, and the name of the train station is the end of the world. So we felt like we have fulfilled the Great Commission by traveling
to the end of the world,
the literal end of the world. So,
so you had mentioned you planted a church in Iraq, and I'm assuming in several other places. What does it look like to plant a church in a place like Iraq, or anywhere else for that matter? Especially with the organization, like what are some of the steps that need to take place for that to happen?
Well, first off, it's very interesting because our goal, our ministry, our calling is not to start churches.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes it's just required. Sometimes it just has to be done, and in God's move, you can see what's going on there that has to be done. What we much prefer to do is to find a church that's already heard the call of God, already has a structure, is already doing the things of God the way that they should be, and we want to come in and help them, give them an injection. Because, anytime you're doing God's work, especially from a startup or from a lot of these persecuted countries, it's difficult. You're beating your head against the wall every single day. It's like that here in the U.S., but you take it overseas, it's even, the persecution is very real. So we want to come in, let them, encourage them, let them know that they have family around the world. We want to help them do things that they probably couldn't normally do. And we come in often as disruptors, disrupting their status quo because they have to now take care of an American team. They have to do things a bit differently. And it gives them an opportunity to think outside the box, do things that they would have never normally done. And more often than not, it becomes very extremely effective types of evangelism that helps build the church, and that helps the church grow continually. This is our call. This is our goal. There are certain situations, like in Iraq, there really was not a church that we could work with. So we had certain situations that kind of required us to we had a definite call of God to bring teams in. There was a definite need of a church that was really following God's way. And we had opportunity. We had a man that the call of God was all over him. He didn't recognize it yet, but he was the only one that didn't recognize it. Everybody else seen this man was already operating as a pastor, just without the church. So everything, all the elements was there. All we did is basically put them together and ordain it. And we supported it for some time, but that's what it was. We brought in teams. At that time, we was bringing in many teams a year and just encouraging him. And that was in Iraq. We've started a few in Russia and started a few in some other places too, like Syria. Syria was a very similar situation. We had a man that was on fire for God. We've known him when he was in Bible college. He was an apostle, clearly. And he had the plan. He was already doing the thing. He started one church. We've encouraged him to do so just by encouragement. And he already did it. It was very successful. When we started another one, we became financially involved in that second church also. And then we started working with that one. That was right up until the ISIS situation came up. And so that one is not, to my knowledge, is no longer in existence because of that situation. But these are very extreme issues when we actually go and start a church.
And to add to this, there is no formula. I wish there was like a formula. This is how you start a church in a dangerous place. But definitely, being sure that this is what God wants you to do is the key. Because without God's favor and without his miraculous provision, none of this would be possible. Even even in Iraq, when we started this church in northern Iraq, out of the blue, it had tremendous favor and rapport with the local government, which is not Christian, which is Muslim. You can't engineer that in any way or shape. It just has to be God's timing, God's favor. And then Chuck really saw that calling of a pastor in the man that we installed as the pastor. He was actually a worship leader at the church in Baghdad and never considered becoming a pastor. But now, many years later,
prior to that, he was a nightclub singer.
Yeah, prior to becoming saved. And so now, so many years later, he's so thankful that Chuck saw that calling in him, because he cannot imagine doing anything else other than being a pastor. So
this is just one story out of many.
Yeah.
You two have traveled the world for years and been involved with missions for years. Is there anything, and Chuck and Helen, this might be two different answers from two different perspectives. What has been one of the biggest challenges you can think of that has happened or that you have had to deal with?
Well, challenges come in many different forms. And it's hard to say which challenge is the greatest. I guess the greatest challenge is the one you're dealing with at that very moment. Kind of like the old saying about a major and minor surgery. A minor surgery is something being done on somebody else, where the major surgery is there. So the greatest challenge, that's a very difficult question. Maintaining a call from God, I guess the biggest challenge that I have on a day-to-day basis is making sure what you hear is truly the call of God, and staying in tune with God's call, because some things just sometimes seem like it's God, it seems right, but that's not really God's call for you. And some things, God's call, sometimes things just fall right into place in God's call. Sometimes it feels like you have to move heaven and earth to get it done. It's just a complete impossible task. And which, if you know clearly it is the call of God, you don't mind doing it. But you don't want to invest all that and find out it's not God's call. So I think the biggest challenge, at least for me, is always making sure we stay in the perfect will of God.
I'm completely on the same page. We're an independent organization. We're not affiliated with a denomination, or we don't have a backing somewhere in the background. We're supported by churches and individuals, and really, have been existing by miraculous provision from God. And so you would think that, probably having enough funds is the challenge, but it's really not. Even though we don't know from day to day where our support is going to come in.
Even though funding is a challenge for us.
It is a challenge. Never, when God set a task before us that was far greater than our financial abilities, it has never happened that he did not provide the funds. So it's not, we've learned not to think of it as an issue, because if God calls, he provides. But I agree with Chuck. The most challenging thing is to know that it is God's will, that we're going at the right place at the right time, that we're, a quick example, we've gone to Iraq every single year since 2006. And one specific time I remember, it was 2014, when the ISIS insurgency just reached its peak, and just to give you an idea where our church is in northern Iraq and Kurdistan, is less than 30 miles from Mosul, where ISIS had its headquarters. And so we were scheduled to arrive there with a team of, 20 people. And all you hear on the news is they just captured and beheaded another person and another person. And so in this situation, there is a very fine balance there. Are we truly hearing God's call? Are we really supposed to go? Because obviously we do not want to endanger our team. At the same time, we don't want to miss the call of God just because outwardly dangerous situation, and the fear that comes from hearing the news. And so that's a very difficult moment when you have to make a decision like this, when you know that you're responsible for the safety and lives of the individuals, and also responsible to fulfill God's calling. So situations like this are extremely challenging. So yeah, I think Chuck really nailed it. That's the greatest challenge.
So something I keep hearing though is that, you go into these places and you do a lot of medical trips, correct, and stuff like that. The supplies that are taken, is that stuff that that your supporters, that churches raise funds for to send? How does that stuff come about? Because a lot of people don't think that they hear about, oh, we took medical supplies, we're going on a trip. Well, they don't really think back to, where's this stuff coming from? Especially you guys are a mission organization supported by churches. So how do people raise funds for stuff like that?
That's a very good point. Again, when God calls you to do something, he already has people in mind that he is going to accomplish it through, because believe it or not, God uses people to accomplish his work. And I think he cherishes that. He enjoys collaboration with us, because this is part of our relationship with him. And so I think it's a very exciting thing that he's not just a God that moves us around as chess pieces. finances, but he's a relational God that builds that relationship through giving us opportunities to do the coolest things. So great point, with medical supplies, it takes thousands and thousands of dollars to equip the clinic, because even though we're there 10 days, our clinic sees hundreds of patients a day, and we provide free medication to the people who come to the clinic. So when God called us to that part of our ministry, he connected us with a person who is an owner of a pharmaceutical company. And he actually equips our clinics with the medical supplies, hundreds and thousands of dollars of medical supplies he has donated to World Missions Alliance to provide medication for these clinics. So this is mind-boggling, and it would have taken months and months of fundraising, for us to do that if we had a goal, to raise funds for just the medicine. It's not just the medicine. We need gifts for the refugees. We need Bibles that we do Bible distribution. It's even though the missionaries self-fund themselves, but the work that we do on the ground also takes funds. But it will be people like this who just we lay out the need. We'll let people know, and hopefully they share it with others.
And it is a whole thing. Somebody mentioned earlier today that giving is living, or living is giving. I'm not sure which way it went.
Works both ways.
One of the ways.
But why don't you tell the story about that $100 donation you gave?
Well, I don't know. How much time do we have?
All the time we need.
Okay. So a story that taught me about giving being just the cycle that is beyond our understanding, really. I was invited to speak at a women's meeting at a church that is about 5-hour drive from where we live. And so I went by myself and really went planning to be there just overnight and come back. So packed light, drove there. Well, at the end of this women's ministry, the pastor asked me to stay extra day for the Sunday service. And so I did. And in the service, there was an offering being taken. And as the plate is being passed, I realized that I didn't bring a checkbook with me. And really all I had in my wallet was $100 bill. And so if I wanted to give in the offering, I had to give that $100 bill. And that is all I had. And I still had a 5-hour drive. And so I felt uneasy about doing this because this was like a safety net. What if something goes wrong while I'm going home? And then I thought, taking a change from the offering plate is really tacky. So if I put that $100 bill, it goes there. I mean, that's it. So option not to give or to give everything you have. And so I was leaning towards not to give, but when that plate passed me, I just felt compelled to put that $100 bill, and that was that. So after service, the pastor invited me for lunch with other church members, and there he suddenly says, as I was driving to the restaurant, the Lord spoke to me to donate $10,000 to your ministry to purchase Bibles for your future trips. And I was just blown away. I thanked him, and he said, the only problem is we do not have these funds yet. So I may have to fulfill this commitment in installments. Would that be
10,000 or
10,000? Okay. And I said, oh, of course. I said that whatever works for you is a great blessing. So now I'm driving home with nothing in my wallet, 5 hours, and I receive a phone call from a lady in that church. And she says, you will not believe it. As soon as the pastor got home, a lady came to his house that does not attend the church, and she brought a check for $30,000 for the church. So it happened all within 2 hours, where I put $100 bill in the offering, $10,000 was committed, and $30,000 provided. And so it was a very, very powerful story for me personally, of how giving works. You can never outgive God. When you think you're giving him all you have and you don't know how it's going to happen from that point on, he has it all worked out, and you can never outgive God. So
my dad says if you shovel to God what you have, God shovels back to you. And he said, and in my experience, God has a much bigger shovel.
Absolutely. That's an incredible story. And people need to hear stuff like that to know that exactly what we talked about. You can't outgive God, and he will show you the blessings that come out of giving. I tell you what, you two have traveled the world, and what it sounds like you go back to Iraq every year since 2006. So you were obviously still very involved with the traveling side of your organization. And this might be a hard question, but can you think of a story of your time going to any one of these places to where you have seen the hand of God move, and it's just a story that you'll never forget? Again, that is a hard question with so many years of traveling, but is there something that sticks out in your mind to where you are thinking, this is an experience I will never forget?
Well, there's a lot.
Right?
A lot.
That's a loaded question right there.
A story. The question is bringing it down to one story, because we've had situations, where we've had these encounters with the police. It's turned out very favorable. It didn't look like it going in. We've had a situation like in Iraq, the time when we came in, it was very, very exciting. Like not the first time, but this is in Baghdad. We were going into Iraq, and it was right after these truck drivers were killed and hung on this bridge. I don't want to give actually too much detail, but anyway, we were called inside to go on into Iraq. We did our ministry, everything was fine, but we were told as soon as we got there, a friend of ours who also works in the government, he came and told us that right after we arrived, they cut off the road back to Jordan. We flew into Jordan and drove across the desert into Baghdad at that time. And that road goes by Fallujah, which is that's where there's a big crisis going on. They shut the road to Fallujah and said, you're not going to get back. We just need to let you know. Well, of course, in my mind, we took over the whole country in a couple of days. We're going to be here over a week. Surely one city, it'll be done with by the time we go back. I wasn't too worried, but apparently it doesn't work quite like that. So it was still shut down. We had the Fallujah crisis on one side of us. There's another terrorist, Mutada Asada, on the other side that was putting out a $10,000 bounty on each American's head that was there. And we're in this hotel. We had 15 people in this hotel, and the average worker is getting about $80 a month. I had 15 Americans in the hotel at $10,000 a head. Well, the math there started to concern me a bit. But anyway, we still was able to conduct our ministry, but it got really bad the last several days of our ministry there. And so it looked like we're not leaving. And it really looked bad. It looked like there's no way out. In the ministry time, I did meet, we're near the end of the time, I met a Korean that was there. And the Korean told me that he just had his group, he just sent him back. And I said, well, you can't. The road is clean. He said, yeah, there's another way around in the desert. And I said, oh. So I tried to arrange this, and I never felt comfortable. But I also know that the clock is ticking. I have to get out. So they made the arrangements and said, be there at this time early in the morning. And I guess terrorists don't work early in the morning. So this is when they set us to go up there. So we all went there, and I prayed, and I had the whole team. I said, here's what I want us to pray, that if this is God's will, that everything will move smoothly. If it's not God's will, that the trucks don't show up, our vehicles don't show up. And we wait, because I just didn't I had an uncomfortable feeling about it. Well, after about an hour after they're supposed to show up, they still don't show up. I felt like the world was lifted off my shoulders, but again, nothing's changed. We're still in a very dangerous situation. So I sent the team back. Well, when I went to the room, I turned on and found on CNN, they had captured this team of Korean missionaries in the desert. The terrorists have Al-Qaeda. And now the Koreans at this point, they didn't have anything against Christians, and they didn't have anything with Korea. So everything was fine with them. but for us, we would not have had that end. And I knew God saved us directly. Of course, we had no way to get out at that point, and I had to come team together, and tell the team, there's a good chance we're all going to die right here, but tell them in a way that they don't that they're not afraid. That's not an easy thing to do. So we have this whole thing, and I'm trying to explain this to them. Of course, we had one lady, and it was all done. She said, "I can't stay. I'm making dinner for my pastor on Sunday." I told her, "Well, you can leave." I had no idea. She missed the whole thing. But God protected us in all of this. And this sounds like a movie. And I will affirm to you, and as God is my witness, this is absolutely the way it happened. As soon as we arrived there, when we found out the road was cut, I put all of our names on a standby list for an airline to come out. But they were booked 2 months out. And they said there's no availability for 2 months. But I said, I booked the flight for 2 months out, but I said, put my name on a standby list, all of our names. And they did. So now a week later, we're trying to get out. I was able to organize an airplane to fly in, like a charter flight to come in. But the charter flight required 2 people would have to stay back. They couldn't put all of us in. They can only fly 13 people the way they fly. So I come back, and I'm staying back, and I'm looking for a volunteer, which remarkably was very difficult to get a volunteer to stay back. But eventually we got one. And so I said, okay, we're going to pray, and have the arrangements. As we start to pray, my phone rings, and it's the airline saying we have 2 seats open up within like 3 hours of the charter plane is coming to the airport. Said, are you still interested in these seats? I said, absolutely. So that's everybody. That does not sound like it's real. It sounds like it's made up. That's exactly the way it happened. So all of us are leaving out at the same time. So we all go to the airport at the same time, and which was another amazing story, because after I felt everything's handled, nobody will take us to the airport, because that road from Baghdad to the airport at that time was the most dangerous road in the world, and no one would take us. So, but eventually God worked that out too. We got there, and everybody got, well, after the plane left, the rest of us, for the charter plane, they wouldn't let the plane come in because there was a bomb went off somewhere, and they stopped it. And then finally, near the evening, they said we have to land and get off in like 15 minutes, so you have to be ready. So we're waiting. We're doing the head count, and one of our ladies, her name was Faith, she decided she had to go to the bathroom right when the plane landed. So I'm freaking out, couldn't figure out, and I'm asking everybody. I said, "Who we missing? Who we missing?" I said, "The fifth. Okay, we've lost Faith. We've lost Faith. Where's she at?" And then she finally came. We got in the plane, and an Indonesian guard was there in Baghdad, and he looked and said, "That's pretty bad when a Christian team loses faith." But that was a funny story from a very potentially tragic situation. But all of that, that's just one of many stories that's similar of how God is always there in all these situations. He makes a way, and it was a very exciting trip across the board.
Wow. And so my question is, when is the book coming out? Right.
I'm actually working on it.
Let me know. Like I said, that's just one of many stories. And I'm a big believer. That's what a big portion of the show is about. I'm a big believer that people need to know what is going on in organizations like yours, because all they see a lot of times is just the name and that, oh, it's a mission organization. And that's it. And they have no idea of the stories, but more importantly, what God is doing. And also, like you talk about, you feel like your mission organization is set apart from others. And I feel like that's a big part of what Mission Talk is doing, because I am very big on letting listeners or viewers know how they can get involved. And so that leads me to one of my final questions. For people watching who say, I really like what I'm watching, I love the work you're doing, how can I get involved? What are some ways they can do that?
Well, the best thing for them would be to jump on our website. It really has a lot of information there. including how to get involved with the mission teams that are going, how to get involved with our prayer ministry, because we definitely need people who want to support us in prayer. There are many ways how they can get involved financially. They can choose a certain area of the ministry that is particularly close to their heart, like supporting orphaned kids or supporting the refugee outreach, or sponsoring a missionary to go on a mission trip. Basically, they can get involved in all three facets of the Great Commission: give, go, pray. And I think that for a person who wants to fulfill the Great Commission, all three are important. We go through seasons in life when we can go, or sometimes we can't go, but we can give, or sometimes we can't give right now, but we can pray. There is always a way that we can be involved. And so on the website, they can find out different opportunities. We have a special project. We call it Project Timothy. We sponsor a certain amount of young people per year, ages 16 to 24, to go on a mission trip. So for listeners who fall within that age group, I encourage them to check out Project Timothy. We have student groups that we take with us on the mission field, or even involve them as interns with World Missions Alliance. That's an opportunity for the college age young people. And of course, we host our conference every year, Greater Purpose Conference. We just finished the one for 2021. But that's a great way. Normally, we host it in Branson, Missouri. Great way for people to find out about our organization, maybe before they head half across the world from us, to meet us and meet other people who have been involved for many years. And we call World Missions Alliance a family. So once you become involved, you become part of the WMA family. People that become involved, we have people that have been with us since before we got married, since before we were World Missions Alliance. It's a very we're very oriented in building a community of people that have a passion for missions. And so we welcome you into WMA family. But yes, the website is the best way for them to find out more. And of course, contact us and email us, call us, write to us, however you want to do it.
Yes. And as always, for anyone watching, in the description of this video, we will put their website. We will put their social medias. Follow them, keep up with them. We will put also in Helen's podcast, which also, Helen, can you tell us just a little bit about your podcast? I listened to your latest episode about God reviving that calling in us, that dreams. Yes, that was fantastic. And so I'm definitely gonna be listening more. So what brought on the podcast?
I don't know. It's because people listen to podcasts, you know, it's just a way to reach more people. And it happened actually before COVID, right? A couple of months before the pandemic started. So I had no idea how important it's going to become during the months when people really didn't have any other way to listen or, you know, watch something. And so it just started as an idea of reaching more people through podcasts, because we saw the statistics and how popular the podcasts are. I like to listen to podcasts. Chuck does too. It's a great way to receive information while you're doing something else. I'm all about multitasking. And so that's how it started. Surprisingly, it became very popular. So we have listeners all over the world, actually in the countries where we have never been ourselves. I don't even know how they find us, to be honest. But, you know, at first, I just started interviewing people on different topics that are important to Christians right now. You know, I did a podcast on artificial intelligence. That was a very interesting topic to me in terms of how it aligns with the spiritual values. You know, it was really interesting. Then the COVID pandemic came, and we did the director of our medical missions, Dr. Richard Bartlett, actually became a very prominent figure during that time because he established a protocol on how to treat COVID very successfully that was resisted, strangely enough, by a lot of people within the medical community. But he saved many lives with that. So I did a couple of episodes with him. And then I started focusing on really the people that God has brought into our ministry because they come with incredible stories. And I get to hear these stories on the mission field. And I felt like they needed to be highlighted because these are the stories of real people in the vein of changed lives, change lives. And, they have an experience with Jesus that was drastic for their personal life. And then they take this on the mission field. And so I've been highlighting these stories. And I think this is really my favorite part of the podcast right now. And so the one that you listened to, the latest episode, is of a young woman that had a really traumatic childhood, and she was saved at a young age and had a dream of going on a mission trip, but felt like it was not for her. It was just, life was not conducive to her fulfilling this dream. There were no finances, there was no time, and she just felt like this is a forgotten dream that will never come to pass. And then when it did come to pass, that was actually the way that it happened showed her that God knows her intimately, that God knows those hidden, forgotten dreams that she felt will never come to pass. And in addition to the excitement of going on the mission trip, it was really a stepping stone in her relationship with God and receiving that knowledge of his intimate love for him. So I thought that was a very beautiful story. She tears up telling about that story. And I almost teared up myself because we all need to know that God intimately knows us and loves us. And it's wonderful when it happens this way.
Yes. Well, you got a new fan of the podcast here. And so I encourage you to listen to it. It's called Limitless Spirit. And so I'll also take that information down in the description. Now, my final question for you, Chuck and Helen, is I always want to end every session, every meeting I do, with asking for prayer requests, not only for your organization, but for you personally. So what's some specific prayer requests we can pray for you about?
Well, really wisdom. This is something that we pray. We have daily prayer meetings in our office. I mean, that's how we start the work day. And now as you can imagine, our work is very connected with travel. And so with the travel restrictions that still exist, it makes it very confusing. We've had to reschedule some of and strangely enough, we have been able to maintain the mission schedule even last year, but we had to change a lot of things, reschedule a lot of things. And above all, we just don't want to miss God's will when we make these changes. So this is one of the things that we really want to ask is for that wisdom and discernment as we make decisions in the upcoming months. Well, and another prayer request is we're actually heading to Mexico for the second time this year. We just started the outreach in Mexico this year in March, and it was a phenomenal success. We absolutely fell in love with our new partners there and the vision that they have for their community. And so this church is in the process of establishing a Christian school, which is a much needed outreach in their area. Public education system in Mexico is absolutely, it's very worldly, let me put it this way, very toxic in many ways for the children. And so the church is trying to fight that by creating this environment for Christian education. They've already started the school, and more than half of the students come from non-Christian families. This is incredible that non-Christian parents feel that their children are receiving better education in that school than they do in a public school. So with the growth of the school, they have a need in curriculum. And so our desire is to help them purchase that curriculum. And we have a short amount of time to raise the funds. So I mentioned before, we know God always provides, but you know what? Why don't we ask your listeners to join us in prayer for that?
That would be great. So prayer for the funding, for the ministry outreaches that we have, and as we'd already mentioned earlier, for that we truly stay in that right relationship, that we can clearly hear God's voice in every aspect of our lives, so that we can not only our personal lives, but in ministry, lead the ministry into things that God has for us to do, and that we can make a big impact on others.
Amen. Well, you've heard the stories, you've heard how you can be involved personally, and we've heard how we can pray and always continually pray for the Todds and for World Mission Alliance. So I want to thank you for watching. Thank you, Chuck and Helen, for joining me. And we just got a glimpse into what has been years of service and fulfilling the Great Commission. I can't thank you enough for joining with me today.
Thank you very
so
much,
Jacob.